The distance didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, like fog sliding in from the edges of our life, so slowly that I didn't notice when the clear view disappeared. At first, I told myself it was normal. People change. Schedules tighten. Energy runs out. Love doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like tired smiles and shared routines. That's what I believed. That's what I needed to believe. My wife and I had been married for 11 years when the space between us started to grow. We had built our relationship the way most people do, layer by layer, through shared struggles and small victories. We met young, learned adulthood together, made mistakes, forgave each other, and promised we would always choose honesty, even when it hurt. That promise mattered to me more than romance. I could survive boredom. I could survive conflict. I could survive change. What I couldn't survive was being shut out of the truth. I didn't realize that was exactly what was happening. It started with silence, where conversation used to live. She would come home later than usual and offer explanations that felt incomplete, like chapters torn from a book. When I asked follow-up questions, she answered politely but vaguely, as if giving me just enough information to stop me from asking more. She stopped sharing her thoughts the way she used to. Before, she would talk about her worries, her frustrations, her dreams. Now, her inner world seemed locked behind a door I no longer had the key to. When I asked how she was feeling, she said, "I'm fine," in a tone that made it clear the discussion was over. I noticed how her phone never left her side, how she angled the screen away from me, how notifications appeared and disappeared before I could see them. I noticed, but I didn't accuse. I didn't want to become suspicious without proof. I didn't want to be that man. So, I did what many people do when something feels wrong, but they're afraid to name it. I tried harder. I listened more carefully. I planned dates. I asked thoughtful questions. I gave her space when she asked for it and closeness when she allowed it. I told myself that marriage sometimes goes through quiet seasons and that patience was a form of love. But patience without honesty is just waiting in the dark. The distance grew physical as well. She began sleeping earlier or later than me. She turned away in bed. Affection became rare and scheduled, stripped of warmth. When I reached for her, she stiffened slightly, as if my touch interrupted something she was thinking about elsewhere. That hurt more than arguments ever did. I asked her directly one night if something was wrong between us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I told her I felt shut out, that I missed her, that I didn't want us to drift apart without understanding why. She sighed, the way someone does when they're tired of a conversation they've already had in their own head. "You're overthinking," she said. "Nothing is wrong." But something was wrong. I could feel it in the air between us, thick and unspoken. Weeks passed, then months. We lived like polite roommates who shared a history but no longer shared a present. She laughed more, just not with me. She seemed lighter, just not at home. When she talked about her day, it was surface level, carefully edited. I began to realize that distance wasn't just happening to us, it was being chosen. One evening, I overheard her on the phone in the other room. She was speaking softly, warmly, with a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. When she noticed me nearby, her voice changed instantly. She ended the call quickly and smiled at me, a smile that felt rehearsed. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Distance wasn't the problem. Distance was the solution she had chosen instead of honesty. I started paying closer attention, not to catch her in a lie, but to understand the truth she wasn't giving me. Patterns emerged. Her schedule revolved around places and people she rarely mentioned. Her emotional energy was invested somewhere else. I wasn't competing with another person yet. I was competing with her desire not to be honest. The hardest part was realizing that she wasn't confused. She wasn't lost. She was deliberate. She had learned that withholding was easier than admitting. That distance created fewer consequences than truth. That as long as she didn't say anything outright false, she could tell herself she wasn't lying. But omission is still a choice. Silence is still communication. One night, After another quiet dinner and another evening spent in separate rooms, I sat alone and asked myself a painful question. If nothing ever changed, could I live like this? The answer came immediately.
No.
I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. I didn't want to beg. I didn't want to accuse without certainty. I wanted honesty, real honesty, even if it ended us. The next morning, I asked her to sit with me. Not later. Not after work.
Now.
She looked surprised, but agreed. I told her calmly that I felt excluded from her life, that the distance between us was no longer something I could ignore. I told her I wasn't accusing her of anything specific, but that something fundamental had changed, and I needed the truth. She listened quietly, arms crossed, eyes guarded. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "I didn't want to hurt you." Those words landed heavier than any confession. I asked her what she meant. She hesitated, then finally admitted that she had been emotionally involved with someone else. She insisted it wasn't physical. She said it just happened. She said she didn't know how to tell me, so she created space instead. Distance, she explained, felt safer than honesty. I sat there, absorbing each word, feeling something inside me crack open. Not from shock, but from recognition. This was the truth I had been living with for months, without knowing its name. I asked her why she hadn't come to me sooner. She said she was afraid of losing me. The irony was unbearable. She hadn't protected our marriage by staying silent. She had starved it. She had let me doubt myself, question my instincts, and grieve a connection I couldn't understand losing. I told her that honesty might have hurt, but distance had destroyed trust.
She cried.
I didn't. Tears can come later. In that moment, I needed clarity more than emotion. I asked her if she was willing to end the other connection and rebuild with complete transparency. I asked not because I felt obligated, but because I needed to know where we stood. She didn't answer right away. That hesitation told me everything. In that pause, I realized something important. The damage wasn't just what she had done, but how long she had chosen not to face it. Distance had become her refuge. Honesty had become her threat. I told her I needed time to think, and I meant it. Not to punish her, not to manipulate her, but to listen to myself for the first time in a long while. Over the next few days, I replayed our marriage in my mind, not to assign blame, but to understand the pattern. I saw how often I had accepted half answers to keep the peace. How often I had prioritized harmony over truth. How easy it is for distance to grow when both people avoid discomfort. But avoidance has a cost. Someone always pays it. This time it was me. When we spoke again, I told her something she didn't expect. I told her I wasn't angry. I was disappointed, not just in her, but in the version of our marriage that had allowed silence to replace honesty. I told her that if we were going to continue, distance could no longer be an option. No more editing. No more protecting feelings at the expense of truth. I told her that honesty doesn't guarantee survival, but without it, nothing real exists. She listened. She nodded. She said she understood. Understanding, I learned, is not the same as change. In the weeks that followed, she tried, at least on the surface. She shared more. She was present. She answered questions. But something remained broken. Not shattered, fractured. Trust doesn't return just because someone says the right things. It returns when actions consistently replace distance with vulnerability. And vulnerability is hard for someone who learned to hide. Eventually, I made a decision that surprised even me. I chose myself. Not out of spite. Not out of pride. Out of self-respect. I told her that I couldn't rebuild a marriage where honesty had to be negotiated. I told her that love should not feel like waiting for permission to know the truth. We separated quietly. No public drama. No accusations shouted across rooms. Just two people acknowledging that something essential had been lost, not because of one moment, but because of many small choices to stay silent. Leaving was painful, but staying would have been emptier. In the months after, I learned how much of myself I had shrunk to accommodate distance. I learned how easy it is to mistake endurance for loyalty. I learned that honesty isn't just something you ask for, It's something you require. I don't hate my wife. I don't even resent her anymore. I understand why she chose distance. Fear makes people do strange things. But I also understand this. Love cannot survive where honesty is replaced by space, silence, and half-truths. Distance feels safer in the moment. It avoids confrontation. It delays consequences. It creates the illusion of control. But in the end, distance tells a story all its own. And it always tells the truth too late. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. I would rather hear a painful truth than live inside a beautiful lie. Because pain can heal, confusion can pass. But distance, once chosen over honesty, slowly erases everything it touches. That's how my marriage ended, not with a lie, but with silence. And I will never mistake the two again.